So let's take a look at some of Star Wars animation. Dave Filoni is basically George Lucas's protege. He has an extensive understanding and also love of the mythology. There were a couple of animated series from the 80s that we talked about in other episodes, Droids and Ewoks. But then in the 2000s, after the prequel trilogy was completed, um, one of the things that struck out was many people may have expected the Clone Wars to play a larger role in the prequels. But it's funny, in episode 2, the Clone Wars begins at the very end of episode 2, and episode 3 is where the Clone Wars end. There was also a small 2D micro series, which we also talked about, called Clone Wars, but then they expanded that and really fleshed it out. So many more stories than were to be expected. It initially aired on Cartoon Network. It was high quality 3D computer animation. This was a big budget series. It introduced a lot of new characters like Ahsoka Tano, Anakin's apprentice, and got to know the clones as individuals, as personal people, with a lot more nuance added to the story. Before season 1 came out, unexpectedly, George Lucas decided he wanted to do a theatrical release, so they took some episodes from season 1 and made a movie out of it. And this was actually the only theatrical release by Warner Brothers, because they were already involved with distributing the TV show on Cartoon Network. So after this movie in 2008 came the series. There was season 1, season 2, season 3, season 4. The return of Darth Maul, who would have guessed? And season 5. That wasn't set to be the end of it, though, because around that time, Disney bought Lucasfilm. And to some chagrin, they made a lot of changes. We talked about this in another episode as well. They canceled Clone Wars, even though they were not ready to cancel. They were in the middle of multiple story arcs. So they released some unfinished stories as animatics or unfinished animations. Then season 6, or what effectively is season 6 and would later be called that appropriately, at the time they called it The Lost Missions, made available on Netflix. This was before Disney Plus, obviously, and then later on Blu-ray. So this is really season 6. And then sometime later, more recently, they came back with season 7, which they definitively billed as the final season, and that was for Disney Plus, and that one led directly into episode 3. And The Bad Batch, also done in the same exact style, and also taking up right at the end of that, after episode 3, is a spin-off of that. But anyway, moving back to where we were after Clone Wars, Disney fast-tracked another show. This was, I suspect, part of their overall plan to focus more on the original trilogy. Again, not an artist decision, a purely commercial decision, one I have very little respect for. Basically, they're aiming for aesthetics and sound, so they threw a lot of TIE fighters in there and whatnot. I know it's appropriate for the time period, but I also know their reasons for it, and it's just stupid and counterproductive. But thankfully, Dave Filoni was involved, so it ended up being good for the most part. The animation design, not as much. I mean, it wasn't the same as Clone Wars, and that's okay. Difference is good. But it also had more of a Disney-fied feel to it. This series was called Star Wars Rebels. And kind of like Clone Wars, it started off with a movie per se, except this wasn't theatrical, and it was shorter. It was only 2 episodes, so it was 40-something minutes in length. And this movie was called Spark of Rebellion. And later, after this DVD release, they made a slightly extended version with a brand new scene at the beginning with the Emperor. And you can see that episode in its original 2-episode format with that extra scene in the Blu-ray of Season 1, which came out later. And here's the Blu-ray for Season 2. This shows some more perfect examples of how the animation quality got worse because Disney was more concerned with quantity over quality. probably the first thing you may notice is Darth Vader's hand. It just looks atrocious. It's the design of it, the angle of it. It is not good animation. They don't even know where Knuckles are supposed to be. Also, Kanan's pose, very awkward. And Yoda returned. You may see his picture on the back. Terrible design. That being said, story is the most important thing, and the stories just got better and better. And overall, as a whole, it was had some very good story arcs that really enhanced the movies. Got some nice characters like Agent Callus, and he has a nice unexpected story arc becoming, well, you know what, I won't even spoil that if you haven't seen it. Darth Maul returning again. He's got a good episodes. Although, again, I'm not too crazy about his animation. And further expansions on the nature of the Force and things like that, as well as the return of some other characters. So, yeah, it was pretty good. And here's Season 3 Blu-ray. I happen to have the UK variant here. And unlike the American version, this has inner artwork. You see the episode titles on one side, and Sabine with the Darksaber on the other side. And this one ended only after 4 seasons. Clone Wars ended up being 7 and was really supposed to be even longer than that. But yeah, Rebels was only 4 seasons. Here's the final season here. And then after that, there was another series called Star Wars Resistance. So are you noticing a theme yet? It's for each trilogy is a different era of Star Wars. The prequels, the originals, and the sequels. And you got the Clone Wars, Rebels, and Resistance. And Resistance was made with this cel-shaded look that's non-photorealistic. It's still 3D animation, but it doesn't have the detail and realistic lighting of the previous 2 series. So it looks more like a traditional cartoon in 3D form. Now again, Resistance had some good episodes, but they were sparse, to say the least. And Resistance only ran for 2 seasons. It was a lot more of a kid's show. You saw that progressive step downwards. Clone Wars, Rebels, Resistance. Being a kid's show doesn't mean something has to be cringy. I respect kids more than that. Some people don't. And this, unfortunately, was that case, at least in my opinion. The main character, Kaz, was so over the top, klutzy, and just stereotypical slapstick. Not even like good slapstick. I like slapstick. I like Three Stooges. But this is really just color by numbers slapstick. And the main character who does that, Kaz, he's my Jar Jar Binks. People complain about Jar Jar Binks. I like him. He's a good character. He fulfills more purpose than people realize. But Kaz, no. He's my Jar Jar Binks. But if you can get past that and stick around, there are some good episodes and a good story arc when it's condensed. Especially moving on towards the 2nd season. And this one wasn't even released on Blu-ray. It was released only on DVD, so I don't know who that even is aimed at. Who would buy that? Unless just to put it on their shelf because it looks pretty. But it's irrelevant nowadays. Both seasons are on Disney Plus and HD. And speaking of television versus streaming, while the Clone Wars was on cable, again, this was in George Lucas's days, so artistry was given free reign, even at the expense of a not ideal budget. Clone Wars was big budget. They weren't getting as much money as Disney would be satisfied with. That's why they canceled it. But it was a project of George Lucas that he wanted to do. And on the Blu-ray, you get extended episodes. You also get scenes with variable aspect ratio, which is cool for a TV show especially. It's scoped most of the time. But with Rebels, you get a sudden shift in that form of quality, not just the animation quality, but the music and editing. It's very abrupt, choppy editing. Like you can tell it was made to fit around a high amount of commercials. And the music is also chintzier. I don't know if it was full orchestra or a synthesizer, but just the way it is, it just sounds like a synthesizer to me. It's just way cheaper sounding than the Clone Wars music. Same goes for Resistance, that abrupt editing. Thankfully, now with the Bad Batch and Disney Plus as a whole, you don't need to worry about commercials. You can just tell the story that you need to tell without worrying about timing things just right, and that works much better for things. So that's always a plus. And back to good music as well. So anyway, the Blu-ray covers of the Clone Wars that I just showed you were their original release cover artwork. When the complete series was later released on Blu-ray, it was a much more simple artwork that involved mostly just clones in the U.S. that is. But in the U.K., you got that original cover artwork per season all together in a sleeve with new artwork. Much more interesting, I'd say. With a lot of extras too that you're not going to get on Disney Plus. So if you want to add the complete series up to including season 6 of Lost Missions to your collection, you'll find that link in the description below. And the same goes for Rebels, the pilot movie, which also includes a model of their spaceship, the Ghost, that you can make a 3D cardboard model that's inside, as well as seasons 1, 2, and 3 on Blu-ray. You'll find that in the link below. And I will not be including season 4 because if you saw another video I made, this is actually a bootleg that was foisted on me by an eBay seller. So I kept it out of curiosity. I did get my refund, of course. But this is a bootleg, so very well made one, by the way. But I cannot be reselling that for obvious reasons. And I will not be selling Resistance because I never bought it. It's on HD on Disney Plus, and they only ever released season 1 and on DVD at that. So, alright, see you next time.